Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in a decade. And this is one of the biggest mental traps that keeps people stuck because we live in a culture obsessed with instant results, short-term wins, quick hacks, and the illusion of overnight success. Yet, if you look at anything truly great, anything that shifts industries or changes the trajectory of human history, it almost never happens in a year. It happens over 10 years, 20 years, or longer, and it's built brick by brick, day after day, with relentless consistency. And that's why I call this the decade rule, because a decade is long enough to transform yourself completely, but short enough to be within reach. And the reason most people never live extraordinary lives is not because they're incapable, but because they quit too soon. They get impatient. They demand to see results after 6 months. They give up when the results are still invisible. And they never realize that progress is compounding beneath the surface, just like compound interest builds wealth. So too do small disciplines build greatness over time. And if you align yourself with a 10-year vision, one clear picture of who you want to be and what you want to build, then every day becomes meaningful, every action compounds, and eventually you create something that looks like a miracle to outsiders, but to you it was inevitable, because you stayed the course. Think about SpaceX. The first launches failed, rockets exploded, billions of dollars were lost, and the world laughed. But a decade later, the same company is sending astronauts to the International Space Station and landing rockets vertically like science fiction, and people call it genius, but it wasn't genius. It was persistence stretched across a decade. It was learning from each explosion and refusing to quit. It was the decade rule in action. And the same applies to Tesla, which was on the brink of bankruptcy in 2008 and again in 2018, mocked by analysts, doubted by investors. Yet a decade later, it reshaped the entire automotive industry, forced every legacy automaker to pivot to electric, and became one of the most valuable companies in the world. Again, not because of instant miracles, but because of a long vision executed with daily discipline. And this is the part most people miss. They think greatness is about massive leaps, but it's really about incremental daily steps stacked for years. A decade is powerful because it gives you enough time to play the long game, to absorb failures, to iterate, to compound small wins, to mature, and to actually become the kind of person capable of holding the success you dream about. And this is why I always tell people to stop asking what they can do in 3 months and start asking who they can become in 10 years. Because when you stretch your horizon, you stop panicking over short-term setbacks. You stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. And you anchor yourself to something bigger than the current frustration. And this anchoring changes everything. It changes how you work, how you think, how you endure, because if you know you're playing a 10-year game, then today's failure doesn't define you, it instructs you. Today's rejection doesn't destroy you, it strengthens you. Today's delay doesn't derail you, it refines you. And that mental frame is the difference between those who give up and those who make history. The decade rule is not about waiting passively for 10 years to pass. It's about engineering each day so that over 10 years you stack undeniable proof of growth, and that requires discipline, clarity, and ruthless elimination of distractions, because the enemy of a decade vision is not failure, it's drift. It's living year after year on repeat, repeating the same habits, same excuses, same cycles, and then waking up a decade later in the same place. And that is the real tragedy. Not failing, but failing to evolve. So when you set a 10-year vision, you must back it up with daily action. And the question becomes not, did I succeed today? But, did I move one step closer to the vision? Because that one step compounded across thousands of days builds a life unrecognizable from where you started. Here's the brutal truth. 10 years are going to pass no matter what. The only question is whether you arrive somewhere by design or by default. Whether you spend a decade reacting to circumstances or intentionally building a future, and this is where most people fall asleep at the wheel of their own lives. They underestimate how fast a decade arrives. They underestimate how far they could go if they just stayed consistent, and they end up trading their vision for comfort, their future for distraction, and their potential for mediocrity. But you don't have to. You can decide right now that 10 years from today, you'll be living in a reality you designed, and the moment you decide that, you stop being a passenger and start being the engineer of your life. Vision plus time is unstoppable, because vision keeps you pointed in the right direction, and time does the heavy lifting. But you must hold the vision steady. You cannot keep changing it every 6 months. You cannot let boredom trick you into abandoning it. You must pick the one thing, the one mission, the one North Star, and stay loyal to it for 10 years, because loyalty to your vision creates inevitability, and inevitability is the most powerful force in the universe. It bends reality, it attracts resources, it compounds credibility, and it eventually forces the world to take you seriously. So don't underestimate the decade. Don't waste it. Don't drift through it. Because 10 years is not just time, it's the gap between who you are now and who you could become. And if you commit, if you play the long game, if you stack the small disciplines daily, then when the decade ends, people will look at you and say it was impossible, but you will know it was inevitable. Most people wait for motivation as if it's some magic fuel that will finally get them moving. They think once they feel inspired, they'll finally start the business, get in shape, write the book, or build the life they've been talking about. But here's the reality. Motivation is unreliable. It's emotional. It comes and goes. And if your life depends on motivation, you'll never build anything lasting, because the days you need to move most are the days you feel the least motivated. And that's why discipline is everything. Discipline is the engine that keeps moving when motivation runs out. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel. Discipline doesn't care if you're tired. Discipline shows up anyway. And the truth is, the most successful people on the planet aren't the ones who wake up every day excited and inspired. They're the ones who built systems, routines, and standards that operate regardless of emotion. And that's why I tell people all the time, stop waiting to feel motivated and start building the muscle of discipline. Because once you do, you'll realize motivation is irrelevant. Consistency beats inspiration every single time. Think about it. When SpaceX engineers work on rockets, they don't wait until they're in the mood. They follow processes, they test, they iterate, they execute regardless of whether they feel like it. Because rockets don't care about your motivation, physics doesn't care about your mood, and success in life works the same way. Reality rewards execution, not excuses, action, not emotion. And that's why discipline is the ultimate edge. Because it turns ordinary people into extraordinary performers, not through bursts of passion, but through relentless consistency. And the beauty of discipline is that it compounds. The first time you force yourself to get up early and work when you're tired, it feels brutal. The 10th time, it feels normal. The 100th time, it feels automatic. And eventually, it's who you are. You've reprogrammed your identity through repeated disciplined action until you no longer negotiate with yourself. And this is where true power begins. Because the man who relies on motivation is a slave to circumstance, but the man who builds discipline is free, free from moods, free from procrastination, free from the endless cycle of starting and quitting, and that freedom is priceless. Look at athletes. The best in the world don't show up because they're motivated, they show up because they're disciplined. They have trained their bodies and minds to move when the alarm rings, to push through fatigue, to repeat drills thousands of times until mastery is inevitable. And this principle applies to every area of life, whether it's health, business, relationships, or personal growth. Discipline outlasts motivation. Discipline outperforms talent. Discipline outworks luck. And discipline rewires your brain to expect results because you keep proving to yourself through action that you can be trusted. And this is something most people don't understand. Every time you say you'll do something and you don't, you erode your own confidence. But every time you follow through, even in small things, you stack proof that you're a man or woman of your word. And over time, that builds unstoppable self-belief, not because you read it in a book, but because you've lived it in your bones. The secret Elon Musk and other builders use is not motivation, it's discipline wrapped in systems. It's building structures that make action the default, whether it's strict schedules, high standards for execution, or feedback loops that keep the pressure on. The edge is not inspiration. The edge is refusing to negotiate with laziness. The edge is showing up when others rest. And if you want to separate yourself from 99% of people, stop chasing the feeling of motivation and start chasing the practice of discipline, because motivation is a spark, but discipline is a power plant. It produces energy on demand. It doesn't wait for conditions to be perfect. It generates its own momentum, and that's what greatness requires. The truth is, you will not always feel like doing the work. You will not always feel like showing up. You will not always feel inspired. But if you let feelings decide your actions, you're finished before you start. Because feelings lie. They tell you you're too tired, too busy, not ready, not good enough. But discipline ignores that noise. Discipline says, I move anyway. And when you move despite resistance, you grow. And when you grow, results come. And when results come, confidence builds. And that cycle becomes unstoppable. But it all begins with the decision to value discipline over motivation. Let me make this practical. Discipline is built through standards, not goals. Goals are what you want. Standards are what you do daily. Motivation says I'll go to the gym when I feel like it. Discipline says I train every morning at 6 a.m. no matter what. Motivation says I'll work on my project when I'm inspired. Discipline says I write one page every night before bed, no excuses. Motivation is a mood. Discipline is a contract, a binding agreement with yourself that doesn't expire. And once you sign that contract, life changes. Because discipline makes you predictable, not to others but to yourself. You know you'll show up, you know you'll deliver, and that reliability becomes the foundation of success. Look at the difference between people who dabble and people who dominate. Dabblers rely on bursts of inspiration. They start fast, burn bright, then crash when the mood fades. Dominators rely on discipline. They move slow, steady, consistent, and while everyone else is quitting, they're still stacking bricks, still showing up, still building, and 10 years later, they've created something unshakable while the dabblers are still looking for their next wave of motivation. That's the gap. That's why discipline wins, because it survives. The storm's motivation cannot. You must decide right now whether you'll keep living like a slave to feelings or whether you'll become a master of discipline, because once you choose discipline, you'll discover something shocking. The feelings eventually catch up. When you act disciplined long enough, motivation often follows, but now it's a bonus, not a requirement. Now you're unstoppable, because whether you feel inspired or not, the work gets done. And that's the mark of every great builder in history. Not the ones who talked about doing great things, but the ones who disciplined themselves to execute daily until greatness was unavoidable. And that's what you must do if you want to build a life worth remembering. We live in a culture obsessed with speed. Everyone wants everything now: fast money, instant results, overnight transformation. And because of that, people quit too soon. They start something, expect to see massive progress in weeks. And when it doesn't happen, they say it's not working. They don't realize that all meaningful success is built on the long arc of patience, that the greatest rewards take years, even decades. And the myth of overnight success is just that, a myth. When you hear about a company suddenly dominating an industry or an artist suddenly becoming famous, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. You're seeing the public moment of recognition, not the years of silent effort, repeated failures, and consistent practice that made that recognition possible. And this is where most people sabotage themselves. They think if results don't come quickly, then it's not meant to be. But the truth is, if results come quickly, they're probably not worth much. Because everything valuable requires compounding, and compounding requires time. The market doesn't reward dabblers. The world doesn't reward tourists. It rewards the ones who stayed, who endured, who kept moving when there was no applause. And that's why patience is not weakness, it's strength, it's a weapon. Because patience means you're willing to do what others won't. You're willing to play the long game while they chase shortcuts. And in the long game, the patient always beat the impulsive. Look at Tesla. People call it an overnight success, but they forget it took almost 2 decades of near-death experiences, of almost going bankrupt, of fighting entrenched industries before people started calling it the future. Same with SpaceX. People only saw the headlines when rockets landed themselves, but they didn't see the years of explosions, failures, skepticism, the endless nights engineers spent fixing problems that looked unsolvable, and yet the team endured. They stayed with the vision long enough for time to magnify their efforts. That's the formula. Time plus consistency equals transformation. And yet most people ignore it because it doesn't sound exciting. It doesn't sell quick fixes, but it's the only formula that works. And the tragedy is people underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years and overestimate what they can achieve in 10 weeks. They want the big win now and miss the miracle of steady progress. But if you commit to patience, if you commit to playing the decade game instead of the day game, you'll wake up one day unrecognizable, not because of luck, but because you allowed time to amplify your discipline. Here's the paradox. The longer you're willing to wait, the faster things seem to come, because patience creates momentum, momentum creates compounding, and compounding creates breakthroughs that look sudden but are actually the result of invisible years. Think about bamboo. For years it grows underground, invisible to the eye, nothing seems to be happening. Then suddenly it shoots up dozens of feet in a single season, but it wasn't sudden. It was the result of years of root building. That's how careers, businesses, and personal transformations work. Invisible roots before visible growth, and patience is what allows you to keep nurturing those roots when everyone else has already quit. And that's why patience is not passive, it's active. It's the daily discipline to keep showing up, to keep planting, to keep watering even when nothing seems to be sprouting. And the ones who master this mindset end up looking unstoppable, not because they are smarter or luckier, but because they simply refuse to quit before the miracle. Let me be blunt. The obsession with fast results is killing dreams. It's why people jump from one project to another, one job to another, one goal to another, always starting but never staying long enough to compound, always looking for the shortcut instead of building the foundation. And that's why you must rewire your relationship with time. Stop asking how fast will it happen and start asking how long am I willing to endure? Because the answer to that question determines your destiny. The impatient man will always settle for crumbs. The patient man eventually feasts, because while everyone else quit, he stayed. While everyone else pivoted out of fear, he compounded out of conviction. And that's why patience beats motivation, patience beats talent, patience even beats intelligence, because talent without patience burns out, intelligence without patience gets frustrated, but patience combined with discipline rewrites reality. Think about Thomas Edison. He didn't invent the light bulb in a weekend. He failed thousands of times, and yet he didn't view those failures as setbacks. He saw them as progress. Every failed attempt was one step closer. That's what patience looks like. Persistence in motion. Think about Jeff Bezos building Amazon. For years it lost money. Critics mocked it. Investors doubted it. But Bezos was patient. He saw the long game. He kept reinvesting, kept expanding, kept enduring. And 2 decades later, Amazon reshaped the world. That's patience rewarded. The kind of patience that looks crazy in the short term, but inevitable in the long term. And this is the mindset you must adopt if you want to achieve anything beyond average. The truth is, time is going to pass anyway. 10 years will come, whether you build or whether you waste them. The only question is, what will you have to show for it? Because the man who commits to 10 years of steady progress will be unrecognizable compared to the man who spent 10 years chasing shortcuts. One will have built an empire, the other will still be starting over. And that's the brutal reality most refuse to face. Because patience is not glamorous, it doesn't get likes, it doesn't trend, but it is the only thing that compounds into greatness. And once you accept that truth, your whole perspective shifts. You stop being in a rush, you stop comparing yourself to others, you stop getting frustrated by temporary setbacks, because you understand the long arc. You know every step, every small habit, every piece of effort is being banked in the vault of time. And one day the vault will open and release results so massive people will call it luck or overnight success. But you will know the truth. It was patience plus consistency plus time. This is the mindset that separates dreamers from builders. Dreamers want quick wins. Builders want lasting impact. Dreamers chase motivation. Builders chase discipline. Dreamers quit when it gets hard. Builders stay until it pays off. And the difference is patience. Patience is not waiting idly. Patience is building daily, without demanding immediate reward. Patience is showing up when the results are invisible. Patience is trusting the process long enough for it to work. And that's why patience is a superpower in a world addicted to speed. Because while everyone else burns out trying to sprint, you'll still be running when the marathon ends, and that endurance is what wins the game. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid risk. They build their choices around safety, predictability, comfort, and they convince themselves that by avoiding risk, they're being smart. But the truth is the opposite. Playing it safe is the most dangerous strategy of all. Because safety is an illusion, stability is an illusion. The world is constantly changing, and if you're not willing to take risks, you're guaranteeing that life will take them for you, and the outcome will not be in your favor. Every breakthrough in history, every advancement, every company that reshaped the world came from someone who was willing to step into uncertainty, because risk is not the enemy, stagnation is. Fear convinces people to cling to the familiar, to settle for jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, habits that hold them back, and they think they're protecting themselves. But in reality, they're building their own cage, slowly tightening the bars around their potential. And the longer they hide from risk, the more dangerous life becomes. Because avoiding risk means avoiding growth, and avoiding growth means decay. It's that simple. You're either evolving or you're eroding. There's no middle ground, and the refusal to take risks guarantees mediocrity, which in the long run is the most dangerous place to live. Think about entrepreneurship. The myth is that starting a business is risky while having a job is safe, but history proves the opposite. Jobs disappear, industries collapse, technology automates roles overnight. The people who thought they were safe find themselves scrambling, while the so-called risk takers, the ones who built businesses, developed skills, and embraced uncertainty, they're the ones who adapt and survive. The real risk isn't in trying something new. The real risk is in betting your entire future on a system you don't control. Elon Musk didn't build Tesla and SpaceX by playing it safe. In fact, he put his entire fortune on the line when both companies were days away from bankruptcy. And yet it was that willingness to risk everything that kept the vision alive. If he had played it safe, if he had pulled back when things looked bad, there would be no Tesla, no reusable rockets, no shift in the trajectory of entire industries, because breakthroughs are born from risk, not safety. And the same is true in your life. The biggest opportunities will never be labeled safe. They will look uncertain, uncomfortable, intimidating, and that's why most people miss them. They want a guarantee, but the guarantee is that if you keep playing it safe, you will never touch your potential. Let's be clear, risk doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean gambling blindly. It means being willing to step into the unknown, to take calculated action when the outcome isn't guaranteed, and to bet on yourself when no one else will. That's what growth demands. You cannot create something new from the safety of your comfort zone. You cannot innovate. You cannot transform. You cannot lead without risk, because leadership is stepping where no one else is willing to go, and that always requires uncertainty. Think about the Wright brothers. They risked ridicule, physical danger, and failure to invent the airplane, or Steve Jobs, who risked his career to bet on personal computing, or Rosa Parks, who risked her safety to ignite a movement. Risk has always been the price of progress, and the people who embrace it shape the world, while the people who avoid it fade into irrelevance. Playing it safe feels secure in the short term, but it creates long-term fragility. The safe path is overcrowded, it's competitive, it's filled with people who chose comfort over courage. And because of that, the safe path is actually the most dangerous path, because it guarantees you'll blend in, it guarantees you'll compete for scraps, it guarantees you'll never stand out, while the risk taker, the one who dares to deviate, may stumble in the short term but gains exponential advantages in the long term, because the world rewards courage, not caution. History doesn't remember the safe, it remembers the bold, the pioneers, the builders, the ones who dared. So you have to decide, will you let fear trick you into living a life of quiet safety that slowly eats your soul, or will you embrace risk as the fuel of your evolution? Because if you don't, life will impose risks on you anyway. The risk of regret, the risk of wasted potential, the risk of looking back and realizing you lived someone else's script instead of your own, and that is far more terrifying than any failure you could experience by trying. The irony is that failure isn't even the end. Failure is feedback. Failure is part of the process. And every so-called risk you take that doesn't work out is still moving you forward. Because you're learning, you're adapting, you're building resilience. The people who play it safe avoid failure but also avoid growth. They avoid pain but also avoid progress. They avoid embarrassment but also avoid evolution. And they don't realize that the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret is permanent. Regret will haunt you in ways failure never will, because failure you can recover from, regret you can't undo, and that's why risk is not optional. It's mandatory if you want a life that matters. Ask yourself, what risks have you been avoiding? What conversations, what opportunities, what changes have you postponed because they weren't guaranteed? And how much has that already cost you? Because the cost is not theoretical, it's real. Every year you stay in a job that suffocates you. Every year you stay in a relationship that's dead. Every year you stay in habits that keep you small. You're paying the cost of safety with your life. And the irony is the longer you stay safe, the harder it becomes to change, because comfort becomes addiction. And addiction to comfort is the fastest way to kill potential. So you must break the cycle now. You must teach yourself that risk is not a threat, it's an ally, that stepping into the unknown is not danger, it's destiny. And the only true danger is in standing still, because life is not static, the ground is always shifting. And the one who refuses to move will eventually sink, while the one who takes risks keeps climbing. Look at the companies that dominate now: Google, Amazon, SpaceX, Tesla. They were all considered risky, impossible, foolish at the start, and yet because someone embraced that risk, they created something extraordinary. That is the law: risk creates reward. No risk, no innovation, no change, no transformation. So stop asking, how can I avoid risk? And start asking, how can I take smarter risks? How can I train myself to lean into uncertainty instead of run from it? How can I build the muscle of courage so that risk no longer feels terrifying but natural? Because courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision that something else matters more than fear. And that decision is always a risk. but it's the only decision that leads to greatness. The safe man will always be forgotten, the bold man will always be remembered, and the difference between them is risk. So you must choose, not tomorrow, not someday, now, because life doesn't wait, and the longer you wait, the more you decay. So embrace risk, lean into the unknown, bet on yourself, because the biggest risk of all is the life you'll lose if you keep playing it safe. Innovation isn't optional anymore. It's survival. Because the world doesn't move at the pace of your comfort zone. It moves at the pace of exponential change. And if you think you can stand still, hold on to what you know, and coast through life, you're already behind. Standing still is the same as moving backward. Because everything around you is evolving, industries are evolving, technology is evolving, expectations are evolving, and the man who refuses to innovate gets left behind. And here's the brutal truth. The future doesn't reward the one who clings to tradition. It rewards the one who adapts fastest, who experiments, who breaks things, who iterates, who learns faster than anyone else, because in this environment, speed is the ultimate advantage. When you look at companies that have shaped the modern world, Amazon, Tesla, SpaceX, Apple, none of them won by standing still. They won by constantly reinventing themselves, by refusing to accept that the way it's always been done is the way it must always be done, and that mindset must be yours if you want to survive, because the old model of life stability is dead. The idea that you can get a job, learn one skill, and ride it to retirement is gone, and those who still cling to that illusion are waking up at 50, 60, even 70 years old, realizing the world has outgrown them, not because they were dumb, not because they were lazy, but because they refused to innovate themselves. And the cost of refusing to innovate is irrelevance. Irrelevance in your career, irrelevance in your relationships, irrelevance in your purpose, and irrelevance is just another word for decay. Innovation is not just about technology, it's about mindset. It's about refusing to let who you were last year dictate who you are this year. It's about challenging your own assumptions, tearing down your own habits, and constantly asking, what's next? How can I make this better? How can I evolve? Because the moment you stop asking those questions is the moment you start dying, slowly, quietly, invisibly at first, but inevitably, because the man who doesn't innovate doesn't just fall behind the world, he falls behind his own potential. And potential wasted is worse than failure. Failure at least teaches. Wasted potential just haunts. So you must treat innovation as oxygen, as non-negotiable, as part of who you are. Look at Elon Musk. People think he's a genius inventor, but what he really is relentless about innovation. SpaceX didn't succeed because the first rocket worked. It succeeded because they innovated relentlessly. Failure after failure, crash after crash, iteration after iteration, until they built something no one thought possible, reusable rockets. And Tesla didn't become a $1 trillion company because electric cars were easy. It happened because innovation was baked into the culture. Every car better than the last. Constant software updates, constant improvement, constant experimentation. That's innovation. Not waiting for perfection, but moving, trying, failing, learning, upgrading, and doing it all faster than anyone else. And that's how you must think about your own life. If you're the same man today you were 5 years ago, that's not stability, that's stagnation, and stagnation is a slow death. So ask yourself, where am I innovating? Where am I upgrading? Where am I refusing to settle for the version of me that was acceptable yesterday? Because if you're not actively reinventing yourself, you're becoming obsolete, and the world doesn't wait for obsolete men. It replaces them. Innovation requires discomfort. It requires throwing yourself into problems you don't yet know how to solve. It requires failing publicly sometimes. It requires risking embarrassment, but the alternative is far worse. The alternative is invisibility. The alternative is watching others pass you by while you cling to the illusion of safety. And let me tell you, safety is a prison. It lulls you into believing you're secure when really you're eroding. And innovation is the only way to break free. So you must embrace it as a discipline, as a lifestyle, as a personal law. Innovate in your work by learning skills others are too lazy to learn. Innovate in your relationships by showing up with new levels of presence and communication. Innovate in your body by testing new routines, new nutrition, new ways to expand your energy. Innovate in your mind by reading, by questioning, by exposing yourself to ideas that scare you, because the man who doesn't innovate will one day wake up unrecognizable to himself, a relic in a world that no longer cares. History proves this. Kodak was once the king of photography, but it clung to film when the world was moving digital. Blockbuster owned video rentals but refused to innovate when Netflix offered streaming. Nokia ruled cell phones but laughed at the iPhone, and all of them collapsed not because they didn't have resources, but because they refused to innovate. And the same fate awaits any individual who clings to the old self when the future demands a new one. So don't tell yourself you're safe. Don't tell yourself you're stable. Unless you're innovating, you're not safe, you're slipping. And the only way to reverse that slide is to adapt, to experiment, to rebuild yourself over and over until the future can't ignore you. Innovation is not a gift, it's a choice. It's a muscle you build. And the way you build it is by acting before you feel ready, by testing instead of waiting, by shipping instead of perfecting, by learning in motion instead of planning in stillness. The innovators of history weren't the smartest, they were the most relentless, the most willing to look foolish today to be legendary tomorrow. And that's the choice you must make. Will you look foolish for trying, or will you look irrelevant for not trying? Because one of those is temporary, and one of those is permanent. Stop waiting for permission to innovate. Stop waiting for someone to tell you it's the right time. The right time will never come. Innovation doesn't ask for timing, it demands urgency, because the window of relevance closes fast, and if you're not moving now, you're already late. So innovate now, change now, reinvent now, because standing still is the biggest risk of all, and in a world moving this fast, it's the one risk you cannot afford. Ideas are worthless without execution, and that's the brutal truth most people never accept. They fall in love with the dream, with the concept, with the excitement of talking about possibilities, but they never move past the talk. They never put in the disciplined, relentless execution that turns possibility into reality, and so their ideas die, buried in journals, conversations, and half-finished projects. Execution is the filter of greatness. It's the difference between people who build rockets and people who talk about building rockets. And the reality is that the world doesn't pay you for what you think, it pays you for what you finish. The discipline of execution is about building a system, a way of life, where action is not optional, where showing up and doing the work is your baseline, not your exception. Because the people who rise aren't necessarily the ones with the best ideas, they're the ones who can execute relentlessly, day after day, through boredom, through setbacks, through failure, through resistance. And that is the hard part because execution is not glamorous, it's repetitive, it's unsexy, it's often invisible, but it's the grind that produces greatness. Elon Musk didn't build Tesla or SpaceX on the back of inspirational speeches. He built them by executing relentlessly, by turning abstract visions into physical prototypes, by taking meetings at 3 a.m., by walking factory floors, by solving engineering problems in real time, by living inside the grind when others would have tapped out. Execution is where the dream collides with reality. And most dreams die in that collision, not because the dream was wrong, but because the person wasn't disciplined enough to do the daily, difficult, often monotonous work that execution demands. Execution requires consistency. It requires you to show up when motivation has vanished, when nobody is cheering, when results are invisible, because execution is about momentum. It's about stacking small wins, compounding effort, and refusing to stop. And the tragedy is most people quit before compounding kicks in. They do the work for weeks, maybe months, and when they don't see massive results, they give up. They fail not because the idea failed, but because they failed to execute long enough for the idea to grow. The discipline of execution is about killing that impatience. It's about training yourself to trust the process, to understand that greatness is not one giant leap, it's a million disciplined steps. And if you stop stepping, you stop building. Look at SpaceX. When they were testing rockets, failure was constant, explosions, setbacks, bankrupting pressure, and most people would have quit. Most people would have said the idea doesn't work, but Elon didn't stop. He executed again and again, iteration after iteration, because execution doesn't care how many times you fail. Execution is about trying again, refining, improving, and executing again. That cycle is the lifeblood of innovation, and without discipline, you'll never endure it, because the temptation to quit is overwhelming. The temptation to wait for perfect timing is constant, but there is no perfect time. There's only action now. And the disciplined executor knows this. He doesn't wait for clarity. He builds clarity by moving. He doesn't wait for motivation. He builds momentum by doing. And that is the difference. Execution is not emotional. It is structural. It is a decision repeated daily, regardless of feelings. regardless of circumstances. Execution also means accountability. It means you stop hiding behind excuses. You stop blaming lack of resources, lack of support, lack of luck, and you start owning the fact that if it's not done, it's because you didn't do it. Harsh, yes, but liberating, because it gives you back control. You can't always control outcomes, but you can control execution. You can control whether or not you show up, whether or not you deliver. And over time, consistent delivery compounds into extraordinary outcomes. Most people miss this because they think success comes from occasional bursts of effort, but real success comes from disciplined execution sustained over time. It's like fitness. You don't get strong by working out once in a while with intensity. You get strong by training consistently for years. And execution works the same way. You don't build Tesla in a weekend. You build it through thousands of executed tasks stacked relentlessly over time, and that is the discipline you must embrace. Execution demands prioritization. You cannot execute everything, so you must execute what matters. Focus is execution's best friend, because without focus, you'll execute on distractions, and distractions never produce greatness. So the discipline of execution is not just about doing a lot, it's about doing the right things with relentless consistency. And this is where most people fail. They scatter their energy across a dozen projects. They dabble instead of committing. They confuse busyness with progress. But disciplined execution is about saying no, about cutting the non-essential, about pouring your energy into the few things that matter and executing them better than anyone else. And when you do that, you separate yourself, not by brilliance, but by discipline, not by talent, but by consistency. Execution also requires resilience, because the path will not be smooth. You will be tested, you will be rejected, you will fail, you will be laughed at. And the only way through that storm is disciplined execution, to keep building, to keep showing up, to keep doing the work even when the external validation is zero. Because eventually, results come, and when they do, they look like miracles to everyone else. But to you, they look like the inevitable result of relentless execution. That's why Musk often says, if something is important enough, you should try even if the odds are against you, because execution in the face of impossible odds is what changes the odds. And if you quit before execution compounds, you never give your idea a chance to survive. The discipline of execution also transforms your identity. Every time you execute when you don't feel like it, you reinforce the identity of a builder, of a doer, of someone who finishes, and soon, execution stops being something you do and becomes who you are. And once it becomes who you are, success becomes inevitable, because you no longer negotiate with yourself. You no longer debate whether to do the work. You simply do it, and that identity is priceless. It's the armor that carries you through seasons of doubt, through fatigue, through criticism, because you know who you are. You are a man or woman of execution, and that truth cannot be shaken. Execution is also the bridge between vision and reality. Without execution, vision is hallucination. Without execution, potential is wasted. Without execution, ideas rot. But with execution, even imperfect ideas grow, evolve, and sometimes change the world. So stop waiting, stop talking, stop planning endlessly, start executing, and execute with discipline. Because the disciplined executor is unstoppable, and the world cannot ignore someone who shows up, delivers, and refuses to quit. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the raw material of success. It is the fuel, the data, the pressure test, the feedback loop that separates the dreamers from the builders, the weak from the resilient, the average from the extraordinary. But here's the problem. Most people treat failure like a death sentence instead of what it really is, a launch pad, and so they run from it. They avoid it. They fear it. But in doing so, they avoid the very thing that would forge their greatness. And the truth is simple. You cannot create anything truly groundbreaking without failure. SpaceX rockets did not soar to orbit without exploding on the pad. Tesla didn't become a global leader without near bankruptcy. And no human being who has ever achieved anything worth remembering did so without walking through the fire of failure. Resilience is not about never falling. It is about learning how to use every fall as propulsion, every setback as thrust. And if you can rewire your relationship with failure, if you can see it not as a signal to stop, but as a demand to adapt, then there is nothing you cannot achieve. But you must understand this deeply. Resilience is not optimism. Resilience is not blind positivity. Resilience is the discipline of returning stronger. It is the decision to extract value from pain, to mine lessons from defeat, to convert humiliation into horsepower, and that is why so few people become extraordinary, because it requires you to look directly at your worst moments, your biggest mistakes, and instead of running, to stand in them, to ask, what is this teaching me? How can this make me stronger? How can I use this to fuel my next move? When rockets explode, we don't bury the dream. We sift through the wreckage. We find the faulty valve, the misaligned sensor, the software glitch, and we fix it. We don't throw away the entire vision because of one failure. We use failure as data. And that's what you must do in your own life. Stop labeling failure as personal. Stop saying, I am a failure. No, you experienced failure. You collected data. And now the only question is, what will you do with that data? Most people waste it. They drown in shame. They attach their identity to a single event. They quit. And so they never discover the compounding power of resilience. But the resilient understand that every failure, every setback is just another launch rehearsal, another simulation, another step toward orbit. And the reason they eventually achieve what others call impossible is not because they are smarter, but because they were willing to fail more, to fail faster, to fail forward, to fail loudly, and to extract fuel from every single setback until success became inevitable. Think about Thomas Edison failing thousands of times before inventing the light bulb. Imagine if he had taken failure personally. If he had stopped at failure number 500, we would live in darkness. Instead, he said, I have not failed. I've simply found thousands of ways that don't work. That is resilience. That is how you turn failure into fuel. Or think of Abraham Lincoln, who lost election after election, suffered personal tragedy, walked through depression, and still rose to become one of the greatest leaders in history. His failures did not define him. They refined him. They built a depth of character that no easy path could have ever given him. And that is why resilience is your most valuable asset. Because the world will not spare you from failure, the market will crash, people will betray you, your health may falter, your ideas will face ridicule, and you will fall short. But resilience makes you anti-fragile. It allows you not just to withstand the blows, but to grow stronger from them, to turn pressure into performance and failure into fuel. Now let's be very clear. Resilience is not automatic. It is built, it is forged, it is trained like a muscle, and you train it every time you refuse to quit. Every time you stand up one more time than you were knocked down. Every time you decide that the lesson is more valuable than the comfort of avoiding pain, and over time resilience becomes your superpower. It becomes the thing that sets you apart because most people cannot take the heat. They crumble after one big setback. They settle for smallness because it feels safe. They trade their potential for protection, and in doing so, they rot slowly inside. But if you can choose resilience, if you can choose to keep building after rejection, to keep moving after humiliation, to keep executing after loss, then you will outlast everyone around you, because resilience compounds. Every time you endure, you build more strength, more confidence, more data, more clarity, and eventually your very presence intimidates obstacles because you have proven that nothing can stop you. Elon Musk once said, if something is important enough, you should try, even if the probable outcome is failure, and that is not a motivational line, it is a practical law, because when you are willing to fail for what matters most, you unlock a level of power few people will ever touch. You stop negotiating with fear, you stop protecting your ego, and you start living in the arena, the only place where greatness is forged. And yes, it will hurt. Failure will humiliate you. It will strip you bare. It will test your belief in yourself. And in those moments, resilience is not about pretending the pain isn't real. Resilience is about deciding that the pain will not be wasted. It will be invested. It will be turned into rocket fuel. Because once you burn failure as fuel, you become unstoppable. You no longer fear the crash. You no longer fear the explosion, because you know you can build again, stronger, smarter, faster. And that is freedom. Freedom from fear, freedom from hesitation, freedom from the prison of playing small. The resilient are the freest people alive because they know failure is not fatal, only quitting is, and once you know that, nothing can cage you again. So the next time you fail, and you will, ask yourself, will this bury me or will this build me? Will I attach my identity to this setback or will I extract its lessons and rise? Resilience is a choice. It is not given. It is not luck. It is chosen. And every day you have the chance to choose it. And if you do, if you decide that failure is fuel, then every fall becomes another step higher. Every loss becomes another weapon in your arsenal. Every scar becomes another proof that you are unbreakable. And one day you will look back and realize the setbacks that once made you want to quit were actually the very things that propelled you beyond what you thought was possible. Failure did not destroy you, it launched you, because you learned to use its fire to rise.